It's the start of the spooky season, and the Phobies team has decided to take us to a little show. The Carnival of Fears patch 1.5 is upon us, and there's a whole lot of excitement in store. Let's jump in and see what games, what shows, and what other surprises there might be within this patch. An astounding amount of love and effort clearly went into the 1.5 Carnival of Fears release. You can see it in the trailer that kind of caught everyone by surprise, myself included, when it dropped not that long ago, and all of a sudden we almost have this release in hand. I can't wait to dive into it. But before we do, I do have to let everybody know that I am, of course, part of the content affiliate program. The Phobies team does give me some compensation for producing Phobies content. Now, realistically, I'll let you in on the secret. I love Phobies anyway, and this, I can barely contain myself, so let's get to it. So the first thing I want to do is actually go step by step and break down all of the things that are announced in the press release, and as we have seen in a number of articles, in a number of reveals, including, as mentioned earlier, the official Phobies trailer for the 1.5 release, Carnival of Fears. Before we actually get into it, I just want to say I love the theme. It's actually really cool. It feels very fitting both for the season, the Halloween season, as well as Phobies itself. You have this somewhat enticing and exciting and fun atmosphere that's just a little twisted, just a little creepy, which is absolutely deliciously Phobies. Everything about it just screams Phobies. I know I've been speculating, and other members of the community have been speculating for a long time as to what exactly the 1.5 release was going to be, what the theme was, what we were going to get, and truthfully, the Phobies team delivered. I'm blown away by the things that are involved in this particular release. So, let's go one by one. As mentioned, the Carnival of Fears, trick or treat. It's your Phobies' favorite time of the year. Grab your ticket and come visit the strange and frightening Carnival of You. With a brand new environment and creepy new Phobies, we are sure this will be your best Halloween yet. I've mentioned it on stream a number of times. I always talk to my wife about it, that every year I say this is going to be the year I get into Halloween, and every year it just kind of doesn't work out, but I'm feeling it with this. So what do we get in this update? New Phobies. Introducing 8 brand new Phobies stepping out of the shadows for you to collect. Witness 6 new unique abilities that add countless new tactics to your battles. This is super exciting, and we are, of course, going to momentarily be breaking down those Phobies in a more numbers-focused fashion. Already, right off the bat, we're getting an incredible announcement with these new Phobies. If you're enjoying this particular breakdown, by the way, hit that like and subscribe. It does actually help me out. And, of course, you can check the links for my live stream where we do play Phobies and other games in the description. Hit up the Discord, too. But let's keep moving on with the patch. What else is in store? Creepy new world and fun new ways to play. Explore a new creepy carnival environment that is making a frightfully delightful stage for your Phobies to play on. That's super exciting. I love the art direction across Phobies, whether it's the Phobies themselves, it's the music, it's Lippy, or it's the maps. Every element has shown such a degree, such an incredible level of love and care across the board that I shout out once again to the team because it is awesome. And I'm very much looking forward to all of this. The twists and turns continue with an additional 10 brand new maps that encourage new thought-provoking strategies. So this is, and I'll talk about this again later, arguably the biggest thing in the whole patch. The biggest thing. And we'll talk about why a little bit later on. Celebrate the community with 5 new maps designed by our best Phobie Wranglers in the community. This is actually really cool. This contest happened not all that long ago, and the team was able to select these excellent maps from the community that are going to be incorporated into the game. So shout out to all those creators, because this is a badge of honor to say, I made this. Your creation is going to live on in Phobies, and that is spectacular. That is super cool. It's not just new Phobies or new maps that are included in Carnival of Fears. There's actually a whole slew of other elements that are included in this update, so let's take a look at those. Extraordinary new offers. Through the month of Halloween, we'll treat you with limited time special offers. Enjoy a host of new tantalizing special offers based off of your own progression through the game, which will be there long after Halloween ends. This is super cool. There's not a whole lot of information here. There's going to be a lot of speculation, but I'm very excited about this. My number one complaint about Phobies has always been the economy, as in the in-game economy, and obviously that stretches to the out-of-game, real-world economy. This will hopefully bridge a lot of gaps and will hopefully address a lot of the concerns that I have had with it. A new terrifying makeover. In the spirit of Halloween, Phobies will jump into a costume of its own with complete redress of the game that matches the terrifying things to come. This is really cool. You can kind of get it from the little clips that were in the trailer and some of the images that are here. You can see little jack-o'-lanterns and what look like hay bales and other Halloween and harvest season autumnal elements, components that are going to show up. I'm very curious how this is going to affect, even if it's just, air quotes, just a superficial coat of paint on the existing stages. This is actually super cool. As mentioned in the opening lines, that this, of course, is a very Phobie season. A whole new chapter of challenges. Contort your brain with 30 brand new challenges using the new abilities and Phobies we've introduced this year. Celebrate the community once more with challenges designed by the Phobies community challenge winners. This is also another great shout out to the community. All the stuff I said about the maps applies here, of course, and this is super exciting. I know there's a ton of people that may not be ladder junkies. They may not be tournament grinders. Instead, they love the brain twisting, the brain teasers, the brain busters that are the puzzles. And it's super exciting that we're getting more. This has been an absolutely called for element of the client, and the community's been pleading for more, and we're getting them. I'm excited to see what these are. New avatars. Put on a spooky mask of your own and grab one of the 11 new avatars. There's sure to be one that gives your opponent a fright. Earn exclusive avatars for a limited time inside Jax. That's really cool that there's another way to get cosmetics. It's not simply shelling out currency, whether that happens to be coffee, that happens to be tears, or, a little bit of green. In this case, it's actually, you can earn it through Jax, which, as we all know, you can play through the game in order to unlock those. I'm very curious what the numbers will be, but that's a really cool element. So come and join the Carnival of Fears and celebrate with your Phobies as they celebrate their favorite time of the year. I mentioned it briefly earlier, but I feel that the maps are the biggest component of this update. Why is that, you ask? Well, I've mentioned on many other occasions, both on stream and elsewhere, that maps greatly drive the interactions in the game. Yes, your particular collection, your particular Phobie levels will dictate what you can or can't do on the ladder, or even in frenemies games, because if you simply don't have certain stress level Phobies or certain pack-derived Phobies, you of course can't execute certain strategies, because maybe you just straight up don't have a boop. There were players that have shown up in my Twitch chat that were desperately lacking resurrect Phobies for a very long time. Maybe you don't have a great way to either lay or deal with traps. There's a variety of different things that are going to push you into certain directions for strategies. But one of the biggest things is maps. And the maps themselves are going to drive new strategies and, most importantly, breathe new life into Phobies that you may or may not have felt were worthwhile up to this point. It's entirely possible that a Phobie that you thought was terrible, or I thought was terrible, or the community thought was terrible, is suddenly going to become a core component of a standard strategy on one of these new levels. There's a variety of different things that we've seen across different maps that are driven by panic point position, stim positions, healing spots, even where your vault is in relation to any of these other elements, as well as obstacles, or lack thereof for that matter. And we're seeing a wide spread, a wide degree of different maps, different archetypes that could be generated as a result of these maps entering the pool. Now keep in mind, we don't know if the map pool selection is going to change, how this is going to influence the actual rotation, or anything of that matter at this time. But given that there's going to be such a large infusion into the map pool, we have to assume that we're, of course, most likely going to see some of our old standbys, our old favorites, or our old nemesis, not quite showing up nearly as often. Maybe there's certain maps that you love that will suddenly fall by the wayside, or there could be maps that you are always annoyed at seeing every time you loaded into them that will no longer be showing up nearly as frequently in the rotation at all, because we're going to have this large infusion. Now, as mentioned before, these are of course also containing the community submitted maps, and I think that's awesome. That's really cool that the team offered that up as a prize at all, and then of course turned it around so quickly in order to get them into the individual levels. I'm very curious, are we going to see anything referencing the winners on the maps themselves, either in the name or, you know, a little Easter egg somewhere that happens to have the player's name to immortalize them in the world of Phobies, even further than just simply having the map in here? But let me know down in the comments, or hit up my Discord as mentioned, the link is in the description. Let me know which of the new maps has you most excited. Which one are you looking forward to the most? Which one are you dreading the most? Do you see something that immediately jumps out to you that, if you don't want to give away all your secrets, how are you going to take over and dominate on these new battlefields? Because already I'm seeing a huge swath of different strategies, and I'll be breaking these down on stream and in other videos to try and talk about what my initial hot takes and thoughts are. Speaking of hot takes, let's get some hot takes going for those new Phobies. Now, here's the part that I imagine most people are super excited about. We have new toys. In fact, we have 8 of them coming towards us from the Carnival of Fears update. So I want to get my hot takes read into the official record, we'll say, and we'll check back in a few weeks to see how I did. But let me know down in the comments, or hit up the Discord and let me know what your thoughts are on these Phobies and what you think of my opinions as we go through them. It's important to put this out there. It is an election year in the United States, and that could be ranging from local officials all the way up to federal offices. If you're not registered, get registered to vote. If you're already registered, then make sure that you do exercise your right to vote. Unfortunately, one of the major parties in this country, specifically the Republican Party, is populated almost exclusively by extremists, lunatics, and fascists, and often all three are the same individuals. They are hell-bent on the destruction of this country, stripping rights from just about everyone, and turning it into a theocratic dictatorship. The fact of the matter is that we need to oppose this and make sure, again, that votes are cast and that we end up avoiding this potentially disastrous future. Beyond that, if you have the opportunity to, I encourage everyone to look into charities. As mentioned before, I'm of the opinion that both the federal and state and local governments need to do more to ensure the safety and health of their constituents. However, until that is made reality, we need to pitch in and ensure that those in need have help. Now, that goes beyond the United States borders. There are parts of the world, all over the world, that are going to need help. And you can see examples of that in the news all over, whether it's caused by natural disasters or it's caused by man-made disasters. The point is that there's a whole lot of people that are hurt and in need, and there's no reason that we can't help them. You don't necessarily have to donate money, although that, of course, will help. Find a local food bank. Find a charity. Find a way to donate time. Find a way to donate other goods. There's always a way that you can try and help to pitch in, help mankind. It's important. Help other humans. And that's the bottom line. Now, Numbskull here, we saw in the trailer, actually is an AoE Phobie. That, of course, is very notable, but also notable is it is an additional 1-drop. I always love 1-drops, but what else does Numbskull present statistically? It's 1,000 health, which is already incredible. That is as much health as Boomer starts with, which all of you Boomer fans out there are already screaming, oh my god, it's another tank 1-drop. Maybe there's a few other people screaming that, but those aren't the only stats. It also only has a single movement. That's actually a big deal. We've seen single movement 1 keys in the form of Ted and Jill prior to this. How much is this going to impact things? We'll have to see. Of course, it is a melee Phobie, big shock there. It does have the AoE. It does also notably have 320 damage. Now that is actually an above average attack. It's within the context of 1-drops. Of course, there are things that are outliers like AWOL and Boom, but for the most part, this is a very, very high level of attack. But circling back to the movement, I think that the biggest problem for this Phobie is, of course, the 1 movement. We're not likely to see this on larger maps. It's possible, but given the odd configuration of the new maps, as well as certain old maps, I could certainly see this being a major player where you're gonna have to just hold a point. And this represents a fairly significant threat just from a damage output perspective, as well as the fact that you could end up hitting multiple phobies. If you ever actually land a multi-hit, you're probably very happy about it, especially because this thing is undead. Spiky Beetle Spiky. Absolutely, and I think Numbskull will make an appearance early on. It is, of course, a common, so we're likely to see a whole bunch of these showing up across the board at all various levels of the ladder. At worst, it is a very, very tanky one-drop, so it means that you will recap a point. Your opponent has traps, it doesn't matter. You're likely to tank whatever the trap happens to represent and recap that point. I really like Numbskull. I am concerned about the one movement, but I think ultimately Numbskull is going to find a home in at least some players' strategies. Now, moving on from Numbskull, we have an ultra rare phobie that has been lighting up my personal Discord. Why is that? Because as soon as Bad Omen was revealed in the trailer, we have a whole bunch of cat lovers who hang out both in Discord and on my live stream, RTChompGG over on Twitch. And Bad Omen represents a very, very unique set of abilities. This is a damage debuff here that's coming from a 2-drop. That's actually fantastic. But wait, there's more. And before we get to the more, let's talk and go top down. 2-drop, 800 health, which is slightly above average for a 2-drop overall. Now, the average health for a 2-drop is a little weird. Why is it weird? Well, there's a bunch of resurrect phobies that naturally, as you'd imagine, have lower than, air quotes, average health. They bring the average down. However, even after you remove those phobies from the pool, it still ends up having a slightly above average health pool, which is pretty solid for a 2-drop. You know, you don't want to send something out there that's just going to die. Now, the drawback, of course, is that it doesn't have exactly the damage output that you'd want. It's a slightly below average attack for a 2-drop. It happens. But with 800 health, 2 movement, and melee range, and that 320 attack, you don't feel terrible about having Bad Omen out there just as a body. But of course, you don't actually just want it for the body. You really want it for bad luck. So now we're circling back to what we started with, and we have our melee range damage debuff for 250 damage at level 1, but notably, it's AoE. Now, it does have a warm-up of 1 turn. You can't just pop it out and immediately debuff things. It has a 2-turn cooldown. But Bad Omen represents yet another ability-based, we'll say, 2-drop. What do I mean by that? When you have an ability on a phobie, in a lot of cases, that's the thing you care about. You're not just getting it for the stats. You're doing it with a purpose. You want it to utilize the ability. You're not just throwing it out there because it has 320 attack. If you wanted attack, there are other options to get better numbers. Here, it's bad luck. You care about bad luck, and that AoE debuff can represent a lot. We, of course, have Woolly Bully. We, of course, have Boo Fairy. But Blondie really is the comparison here because of the AoE debuff. If you can land this on 2 or more phobies, you can severely cripple your opponent's offensive, especially early on in the game, and it will allow you to bully them around the board. Here's the other thing. I always say don't neglect your 1-drops, but that can kind of be expanded. You can expand it to realistically any low key cost phobie. They really drive whether you win or lose games. Your early board control, the ancillary pressure, or of course recapping to let you come from behind. Bad Omen serves multiple purposes. It's cheap enough to say, hey, I want to bank for next turn on a small map so that I can get Jin Sting or other 4-drops out. Great, there's Bad Omen. Or I'm on a big map, and not just that I want to bank, but I want to do 3 or 4 different things on this turn. Oh, there's Bad Omen. It just fits into a lot of different curves very, very easily. And it provides additional utility. Your opponent has to respect bad luck. Even if you don't reduce their attack to straight up 0, it means that you're still going to have the opportunity to disrupt their offensive or their defensive. You send Bad Omen in, power down all of their turrets, and then all of a sudden you can actually invade because your team's not just going to get lit up as they're charging into the fray. This is a big deal, and as mentioned, this is now an additional Phobie at the 2 cost. There's actually a lot of 2 cost Phobies that have abilities. 10 of the 16. It's interesting how this 2-drop slot has become, I don't want to say the ability slot, but there's certainly a lot of them, a good chunk of them. And I expect that people who are able to be fortunate enough to open Bad Omen, that this thing's going to show up a lot. After that, let's talk about Daisy. Now, this is one of my personal favorite ones out of the release. Why? It's undead. I love undead. I talk about it all the time. I love them in every game, every book, every movie. I don't know, I'm just fascinated with them. In this case, we get what is assumed to be a undead saber-toothed tiger. Now, we did see in a recent movie that there were undead tigers in Vegas, but this isn't quite what we're talking about here. It's a little bit different when we're talking a saber-toothed tiger. Now, what's funny is that there's no leap on this. Instead, Daisy, as we saw in the trailer, actually tears off one of its own arms and then yeets it at you, as the kids say. It's really funny. I think it's a super cool animation. Again, I've said it a bunch of times before, but shout out to the Phobies art team. I'm enamored with everything in Phobies, but Daisy especially. Daisy is, of course, adorable, but what can we learn from looking at Daisy's card back? Well, Daisy has about half of the average health, which is lower, actually, than the other existing Resurrect Phobies. Ted and Jill, now they're hampered by their movement, but they're fairly tanky. Even the Jackalopes end up a little sturdier when compared to other 2-drops than Daisy. Pterodactyl, surprisingly also, despite the mobility and the range, is pretty tanky. Granted, you could make the argument that it's 7 keys. Daisy being in this middle ground between the cheaper Resurrects and the currently high-end Resurrect and Pterodactyl puts it in somewhat of a weird spot. So we're looking at only 800 health at level 1. It's a little questionable when you first look at it, but then you look at the damage output in conjunction with the 2 movement and, of course, 2 range. I think it's a little bit much to dream for 3, let's be real. But 420 damage is a super high damage output. That's actually way higher than you would expect on this sort of thing. If you compare it at level 1 to the other 4-drops, this is outputting a lot of damage, and it's entirely possible that Daisy goes in, helps finish things off, and then it's going to be very difficult to try and retaliate as the other player, because you, of course, need to step on the bones to ensure that Daisy dies a true death. How is Daisy going to show up, or how often is Daisy going to show up? It's going to be interesting because of the fragility, which admittedly I think it probably needs. Daisy represents that big damage output threat. I don't think you're pushing Heart with this, although that will of course happen. I think this is more an invade-based Phobie, where because your opponent has to not only sink damage in, but also waste time on that movement in order to step on the bones, you can invade and say, look, I'm going in, I'm taking this position from you. You're not going to retaliate and then eliminate all of my attackers, all of my offense, all of my invaders. If you can't, then I'm going to hold this position and then continue pressing on or solidify where I am. They may get Daisy, they may get a different Phobie, but Daisy has contributed by being part of that offensive. And I'm very excited to see where this uncommon Phobie shows up. Since it's a lower rarity, it's entirely possible that we'll be seeing a lot more Daisy than you might think. And I'm excited to see what she does. The next 2 we should really do together, but it's important that while they are a tag team, as you can see, in fact, it even says it in their ability, you do have to keep in mind that they are their own Phobies. We have the rare blue Speedola and the common red Speedola. So we'll start with the blue. The blue is our 5 cost. Now this is much, much higher HP than average for your general 5 costs. Really only Quagmire has higher HP baseline than blue Speedola. That's important enough on its own. This guy is big, this guy is tanky, and absolutely intended to be that grappler that's getting up in your face and not going to let you go. Now beyond that, it actually has higher than average damage. There are only 4 Phobies that have higher damage at level 1 than the Speedola at this point in time. And only 2 have higher damage after the buff, the tag team buff, which we'll get to momentarily. Now this, because of the setup, has some super explosive potential. Remember, 2100 health, tanky. 2 movement, so standard movement, but the mobility matters. Speed kills, right? We'll get to that again in a second. Melee range, all right, can't have everything. 450 damage, that is solid. That's a solid amount of damage to be dealing. But wait, we'll talk about tag team. As compared to previous buffs that we've seen in the past, where it's, say the Jackalopes or Jill and Ted, they get a damage buff. Great. There's more than just simply that for the Speedolas. You can kind of hear it in their names, speed. They actually get a movement increase when their tag team partner is on the board. These guys are going to come flying out of the vault and just start crunching things. They're dropping elbows left and right. It's going to look like Rumbleverse up in here. You might as well take these. Something funny? Maybe? God! Telling you. It's gonna get wild, because if you get the 1-2 punch of blue Speedola followed by a red Speedola, suddenly that blue Speedola that was across the map is standing on your doorstep and it's ready to choke slam you into the next week. This is actually going to be crazy. 550 damage. Now granted, you have to assume, because it's melee, that you're going to have to advance in. You're only getting that 1 hit, but remember, super tanky, and because you can get that speed boost, it could just charge in from an unexpected length where it was safe outside the range of your regular ranged Phobies, and then all of a sudden it's in your face. And again, similar to what we were talking about with Daisy, this could be that invasion force that gets in and you just don't have enough damage to remove everything and punish the invade. This is going to be potentially incredibly explosive. Now, speaking of explosive, let's talk about the other half of the tag team, and that's Red Speedola. This is an enormous health pool. Even among 6-drops, only Cerberus has higher health at level 1 in this patch. It's actually stunning how much health this thing has. No pun intended with the stun, because I expect a lot of stuns to be coming out of this. So, aside from the health pool though, let's talk about the attack stat, which is actually lower than the blue Speedola, lower than the lower cost. It's not unheard of, but it's slightly below average damage before the buff, but it's above average post buff. So it's not that far below, it's not that far above, it's hovering around there, but realistically this is supposed to be the pairing. It's 11 keys, but you can do 11 keys across 2 turns. And again, keep in mind, both of these Phobies end up having 3 movement after they've set up with their partner. That's incredible. A 3-move Phobie, we just don't have that many of those. You got your Rambolinas, you got your Snowballs, you got your Droney families, but like, we're not talking about an enormous amount of Phobies. Anytime you see 3 movement on something or 3 range on something, you have to sit up and take notice. And in this case, we're talking about mostly above average stats, even if there are some hoops to jump through to make it happen. I expect the blue Speedola will show up in many scenarios because statistically, it's just solid on its own. The red Speedola leaves a little bit to be desired. There's probably going to mostly be other 6 costs that you'd rather have for a variety of reasons, whether it's big map, it's small map, different scenarios. But if you have both, anytime your opponent puts a blue Speedola on the board, you have to assume that a red Speedola is coming, or vice versa. You don't know if they have both. And if they do, they could just immediately start dropping chairs or ladders or 2x4s or whatever other wrestling reference you want to include. It's going to be off the top rope, left and right. So I'm real excited about these. I'm super excited. So we're back into my favorite Phobie species. and that's undead. We have Zomboni. So shout out again to the art team. This absolutely reminds me of Plants vs. Zombies, and we've gotten a lot of other pop culture references, either in flavor text or in art or names or a variety of other things showing up in Phobies. And to me, this really leaps out to me as a Plants vs. Zombies zombie. Whether it is or not, I don't know. Let me know, art team, if you're watching this. But Zomboni here is a 6 cost. It's a rare. 1500 health, 2 move, 2 range, 375 damage. Yes, we could talk about the stats. But really this next stat is what people are interested in. Zemergency. It's a 1 range, 1 turn warm up, 1 turn cooldown, heal for 400 health. Now that is the lowest single target healing in the game at this time. You have your Muffins, you have your Clinicos, you have your Metabots, you have your Leshies, etc. However, despite being the lowest single target, we get an AoE heal. An AoE heal, that is huge. That is actually really cool. We do have existing AoE heals, the aforementioned Leshy, of course. However, Leshy isn't alone now at the top of that mountain as the only AoE healer. Being an AoE healer isn't the only unique element of Zomboni, though. You have to sacrifice 400 health, so natively, you can get 3. At this point in time, it's unclear as to whether you can do that 4th heal. I am going to assume that you can, that you're able to do the 4th heal and therefore kill off the Zomboni, even if it's below 400 health, to get the ability. There's no reason to believe at this time that that would not work, but maybe it requires it as part of a cost system that we're not aware of. Remember that the announcement said that we're getting unique abilities. There might be some special rules that we're going to have to figure out, but we're not sure yet. Zomboni itself represents something unique. It is actually difficult for me to determine how this is going to perform. The reason I say that is the closest thing we have to another AoE heal, well, it is another AoE heal, and that's Leshy with Group Hug. Zomboni can heal much more frequently, and of course is a ranged phobie itself, a little less tanky at 1700 health to 1500, but of course costs 1 less key, doesn't push as much damage, but Leshy just doesn't show up all that commonly. Do not underestimate the cheaper key cost, and of course the more readily available phobie, given that this is rare and Leshy is ultra rare. But it's difficult to compare Zomboni to Leshy, whereas Leshy feels like it's just going to push out a lot more healing if that is what you need. Now, notably, if you look at Leshy, Group Hug is centered around Leshy itself, whereas you can hit something next to Zomboni, and then the way I am interpreting this to work is that it will be an AoE centered around the target. So you can reach a little bit farther with Zomboni, which gives it another advantage over the aforementioned Leshy. However, if we start to compare it to single target healing, baseline Clinico heals 750 health. So you need to hit 2 phobies for almost full on each. And by full, I mean the heal of 400 to beat the Clinico. So is that worth it? Maybe it depends. In this case, you obviously would want to do it sooner with Zomboni rather than Clinico because you don't want as much damage sitting on your phobies if you can help it. I think that Zomboni is going to boil down to, in the scenarios where Zomboni is good, it's going to feel backbreaking. You're absolutely going to have the wind taken out of your sails. It's going to be super deflating when you almost kill a couple things, your opponent retreats Zombonis, and all of a sudden their team is healthy again. But in the times where Zomboni is not good, I think it's absolutely going to get outshone by these other healers. Is that problematic? I don't think so. I think it's okay to have these phobies that shine in certain scenarios, and you want phobie A versus phobie B, depending on how things play out. It introduces some collection-related challenges, but ultimately I think that's okay. For the most part, we've had brand new models for each of the phobies. We did have a palette swap in Bad Omen. Of course, we have Razor Claw and Electric Cat already, but we do get a new one. And that is Edgar Allen. I love these crow references, these raven references, because of course, Of course, this is a palette swap of Russell. Now, Edgar Allan, just like the aforementioned Russell, is introducing a global ability, but it's a little bit different. So Edgar Allan's a ultra rare at 7 cost, 220 health, 2 movement, AoE attack just like Russell, and 300 base damage. Now, it has slightly above average health with significantly lower than average damage. Of course, the basis here, or the assumption here, is that you're going to be able to connect with multiple phobies, or you're not really using it for its plain base attack. Why would that be? Well, you have Bird Bath. It's a 1-turn warm-up, 3-turn cooldown that affects the whole map. A plus 100 damage or 1-turn damage buff. So this is a very interesting buff. The obvious comparison, of course, is Gonzo Bonzo and Scritch. Each of those do single target buffs for 300 damage at the base. This is a longer cooldown. Gonzo and Scritch comparatively have a 2-turn cooldown as opposed to 3 here. Now, the length of the buff is the same. Gonzo has a 1-turn buff, as does Scritch. But we're looking at 1/3 of the damage, so you need to hit 2 more Phobies in order to get this buff to actually meet what they're doing, let alone exceed. Now, there are a number of advantages afforded by Edgar Allan over Gonzo and Scritch, respectively. 1, it does have an AoE attack, and it does, based on the trailer, buff itself. It's entirely possible that you're going to land the buff from Edgar Allan onto your own Edgar Allan, and if it's already in position, now it's a 400 attack instead of 300. Is that worth it for 7 keys? We might be stretching it there, but it also allows for greater mobility. You don't necessarily have to centralize, oh, well, my Gonzo or Scritch is just following around my one other Phobie and chasing their Phobie that I needed to connect with around the board, and your opponent just kind of runs you around like it's yakety sax. Just blow up your opponent's entire board, regardless of where they're positioned. Your opponent has to respect now all angles. And even a single 100 damage buff can absolutely make the difference between eliminating an opposing Phobie or coming up just shy and thereby losing the game. I think Edgar Allan is a really cool ability. I think it's going to take some usage and some preparation to be able to set up scenarios, and it's going to rely a lot on player skill to recognize, yes, this is a scenario where I can slam this onto the board and absolutely crush the opposition. Now, the last Phobie I saved for last intentionally, because this is arguably the most intriguing Phobie out of this set of 8. It's, of course, yet another good boy to add to the collection, and that is the appropriately named Werewolf. Werewolf is a very interesting Phobie because of its transformability. At the time of this recording, we don't actually know how this ultra rare works. It's assumed that this is going to be an activated ability, that it's going to transform like this and then stay in this mode, but we don't know exactly how it's going to transform back. Presumably, it's going to do it automatically once the effect ends. But how long does that last? How long are we going to see the werewolf in its werewolf form, as opposed to the quote-unquote just plain wolf? What we do know, however, is that it starts out relatively anemic. It's a 950 health 4 cost, not super impressive, but it does have 3 movement. As mentioned with the Speedolas, we're looking at 3 movement, which is super duper threatening. This can absolutely present a humongous threat for your opponent, almost independently of where they are on the board. It only, of course, has a 1 attack range and 280 damage. Now, this does draw a parallel to Snowball, which it does seem to share a model with, at least in its powered down form, its normal form, its plain form. The parallel here is that 3 range and, of course, a somewhat anemic attack, not exactly the most impressive health pool. But that's where the similarities kind of change. When we get transformed, we're talking an enormous health growth. It does lose a movement range, but then of course we're also getting an impressive jump in damage output. This is actually a huge stat gain, and that's why the transformation process is so crucial. At the time I'm recording this, again, we don't know exactly how this is going to shape up, how this plays out, because there are going to be a lot of factors that play in. It may be a one-time transformation. It could transform back, but that's going to drive a lot of questions, such as, what if you take 1,000 damage and then try and transform back? Does it scale the damage? Do you just die? Will it not even let you because it can't go back once it's sustained that much damage? There's a variety of different things, including what if you want to transform back, and assuming you can, in order to get the 3 movement back to then zip around the stage and present a more mobile threat to your opponent. There are reasons to want to change back and not necessarily stay in the much more ravenous form that is the werewolf, despite the increased stats. The werewolf represents a lot of cool things, and I'm super excited about it. Again, not the least reason because it's another good boy. So who else is excited? Because I know I am. I can't wait for this release to actually hit the clients, for us to be able to play with these new phobies, to be able to play on the new maps and explore the new challenges and all the other details that have been introduced in the Carnival of Fears patch 1.5. It's incredible what the Phobies team has managed to pull off. I'm excited both about this and the future of Phobies. But let me know down in the comments what you're excited about. Is it the new Phobies? Is it the new maps? Is it some other aspect of this update? Because there are so many different things to love. Let me know what you think is going to start dominating the ladder, or what you think is actually going to fall by the wayside now that we have this influx of new content. As always, the likes and subscribes do help. If you want to check out more Random Thoughts content, including more Phobies content, of course, check out all the links in the description. But that's going to do it for this one, so as always, everybody, thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and Black Lives Matter.